You ever stop and just wonder about the stuff you own? Why your phone was designed in California, but your t-shirt was made halfway across the world? It feels a little random sometimes, doesn't it? But it's actually all part of this giant, fascinating global puzzle.
Okay, let's get right into it with a perfect example. The United States builds and sells these massive, incredibly complex jet aircraft to the rest of the world. But for something as American as baseball, it actually imports most of its baseball gloves. So what's the deal? This one little question, it's the key that unlocks the whole mystery of how international trade really works.
So here's our game plan for putting this puzzle together. We're going to start with how a country's natural resources make some goods cheaper to produce. Then we'll get into how trade affects real jobs. After that, we'll look at other big factors like technology and what customers want. And finally, we'll see how governments themselves can jump in and change the game completely.
All right, let's kick things off with the big, foundational idea. It all starts with what a country has and what it doesn't. This is called the factor endowment theory. It sounds complicated, but the core idea is actually super simple. It just says that countries are good at making stuff that uses the resources they have a ton of. You know, if you've got a lot of something, that thing is going to be cheap, and that gives you a built-in advantage.
And this is where that theory gets real. Just look at these numbers. For every worker, the US has way more capital. We're talking machinery, factories, all that stuff, than China does. So we'd say the US is capital abundant, while China is labor abundant. And just like the theory predicts, the US sells capital-heavy things like airplanes, and China sells labor-heavy things like clothes.
And you can see how it's just this perfect chain reaction, like a set of dominoes. You have a lot of a resource, so that resource is cheap. Because it's cheap, the products that use it are cheap to make, and that is what creates your country's special advantage on the world stage. Simple as that.
This graph here really shows the magic. On the left, before trade, each country is stuck with what it can make on its own. But look at the right side. After they specialize, the US making planes, China making textiles, and then trade with each other, they can both consume way more at that point C. That point is totally out of reach for either of them on their own. That's the payoff. That's the big win from trade.
But here's the thing. Those gains, they aren't shared equally. The theory is neat and tidy, but for real people and real businesses, the reality can be, pretty tough. Let's look at the human side of all this.
This brings us to a really important idea called the Stolper-Samuelson theorem, and it's a big one. It basically predicts that even if a country as a whole gets richer from trade, some people inside that country are actually going to get poorer. Trade helps the people who own the resources you have a lot of, but it hurts the people who own the resources that are scarce.
So let's just break that down. In a country that has a ton of capital, like the US, the owners of that capital and the high-skilled workers who use it, their incomes go up. They're the winners. But unskilled labor, which is the more scarce resource in the US, now has to compete with labor all over the world, so their wages can get pushed down. And right there, that explains so much of the political heat around free trade.
And hey, this isn't just an abstract theory. It's real. When economists studied the China shock, that huge flood of imports from China in the 2000s, they found something pretty stunning. At least 20%, 1/5, of the decline in American manufacturing jobs during that time was a direct result of this new competition.
But hold on, because it gets even stickier in the short run. A steelworker with 20 years of experience can't just flip a switch and become a software engineer tomorrow. Their skills are specific to their industry. The specific factors theory gets this. It says resources that are kind of stuck in an industry competing with imports are going to lose out. At the same time, the resources specific to the industries that are exporting more, they're going to win.
So, that first model we talked about is super powerful, but it doesn't explain everything, not even close. For example, why do rich countries with pretty similar resources trade so many similar things with each other? You'd think they'd just make their own. So, yeah, the plot definitely thickens.
To really get the full picture, we need to add a few more pieces to the puzzle. We're going to look at how the sheer scale of production, what customers actually want, and even a product's life cycle can totally shape who sells what to whom.
First up, economies of scale. This is a fancy term for a really simple idea. The more you make of something, the cheaper it gets to make each individual one. By opening up a global market, trade lets a company scale up to produce millions of phones or cars, which drives the cost way down. In this game, bigger is definitely cheaper.
Next, we've got the theory of overlapping demands. This one suggests that people in countries with similar paychecks tend to want to buy similar kinds of stuff. So you get wealthy consumers in both Germany and Japan who all want high-end quality cars, so they trade them back and forth. It's not about what resources the country has, it's about what the people want to buy.
And finally, there's the product cycle, which is so cool because it shows how the advantage can actually shift over time. Think about the pocket calculator. It started out as this cutting-edge American invention. The US made them and exported them. But then, as the product got standardized and easier to make, production moved overseas to cheaper places. And eventually, the cycle came full circle and the US started importing the very thing it invented.
So, up to this point, we've kind of talked about comparative advantage as if it's something that just happens, like it's a fact of nature based on your resources or innovation. But there is one last, incredibly powerful player we have to talk about: the government.
And this is where something called industrial policy comes in. This is the idea that a trade advantage doesn't have to be natural. You can build it on purpose. Governments can strategically use subsidies, pour money into research, and use other tools to pick and promote what they think will be the winning industries of the future.
And the all-time classic example of this is the epic showdown between Boeing and Airbus. Both of these aviation giants got huge support from their governments, just in different ways. The US helped Boeing more indirectly, with things like military research contracts and big tax breaks. Europe, on the other hand, was very direct, giving Airbus massive loans at super low interest rates. In the end, the World Trade Organization looked at all of it and said, you know what? Both of you got illegal subsidies.
And these government policies have massive, real-world consequences. This wasn't some friendly competition. It blew up into a huge trade dispute, where the WTO eventually gave both sides the green light to slap billions and billions of dollars in tariffs on each other's planes and other goods.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most important question. If a country's advantage in trade isn't just about what it's blessed with, but it's something that can be actively created with government policy, well, what does that mean for the future of global competition? What's to stop every country from trying to subsidize its own industries to get to the top? It points to a future that could be an endless cycle of trade fights. And that is the new, very uncertain frontier of this global trade puzzle.